It was a warm afternoon in Beverly Hills, and the street shimmered with the kind of golden sunlight that makes everything look more expensive. The sidewalks were filled with people carrying glossy shopping bags, the kind that made others turn their heads. Cars glided past with tinted windows, and perfume drifted from the open doors of boutiques where soft music played in the background. Among the crowd walked a woman named Clara. She wasn't dressed like most of the shoppers around her. Her jeans were a little faded, her sneakers scuffed from use, and her loose sweater hung casually over one shoulder. Her hair was tied back in a simple knot, the kind you do when you've been too busy to worry about how you look. She had just come from her art studio where she'd spent the morning painting. Her hands still carried faint traces of dried paint, and there was a small smudge of color on her wrist that she hadn't noticed. Clara wasn't planning to shop that day. She had been walking to a cafe nearby when a bright display in a boutique window caught her eye. The mannequin was wearing a long silk dress, deep blue with hand-stitched silver threads that shimmered when the sunlight hit it. It reminded her of a night sky, calm, mysterious, and beautiful. She paused for a moment, smiling to herself. Maybe, she thought, she could treat herself for once. She had an upcoming gallery event, and something elegant like that dress might be perfect. After a brief hesitation, she pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. The air inside was cool, and a soft fragrance of jasmine floated through the space. The floor gleamed like glass, and the walls were lined with neatly arranged designer pieces. Two shop assistants stood behind the counter, chatting in low voices. They glanced up the moment Clara entered. Their smiles faded slightly as they looked her over. Her simple clothes, the smudge on her wrist, the old canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder. Then just as quickly they turned back to each other. Clara didn't pay much attention. She was used to being unnoticed in places like this. She began walking slowly between the racks, running her fingers over the soft fabrics. Every piece seemed beautiful. Delicate silks, crisp linen, smooth cashmere. She found the blue dress from the window and gently lifted the hanger to look closer. It was even more beautiful up close, and she imagined what it might feel like to wear it. Before she could take it to the fitting room, one of the assistants approached her. The woman's tone was polite, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said. "Can I help you with something?" Clara smiled. "Oh, I was just admiring this dress. I'd like to try it on if that's okay." The assistant tilted her head slightly, her gaze lingering on Clara's worn sneakers. "That one is part of our exclusive collection," she said carefully. "It's quite expensive." Clara blinked, unsure how to respond. "That's all right," she said gently. "I just want to see how it fits." The assistant gave a short, awkward laugh. "Of course, but maybe I can show you something else. We have a few pieces on sale near the back." She pointed toward a small rack in the corner where older designs hung, most of them clearly out of season. Her tone made it sound like she was doing Clara a favor. Clara felt her cheeks warm, but she tried to stay calm. "No, thank you," she said softly. "I'd just like to try this one." The woman hesitated, then sighed. "All right," she said finally. "But please be careful, Thies, the fabric is delicate." As she walked away to fetch the key to the fitting room, Clara noticed the other assistant whispering something, covering her mouth as she glanced in Clara's direction. They both smiled, and one gave a quiet laugh. Clara's stomach sank a little, but she pretended not to notice. She focused instead on the dress in her hands, trying to remind herself that she had every right to be there. The assistant returned and led her to the fitting room. The space was small but elegant, with a long mirror and soft lighting that made everything look perfect. Clara changed into the dress carefully, smoothing the fabric over her shoulders. It fit like it was made for her. For a moment she forgot everything, the looks, the whispers, the feeling of being judged. She turned slightly in the mirror and smiled. The woman staring back at her looked confident, radiant, and at peace. When she stepped out to look in the larger mirror by the fitting area, the two assistants glanced up again. One raised her eyebrows and whispered something to the other. Clara caught the words, "She can't afford that," before they both looked away. The warmth in her chest began to fade. Still, she wanted to be polite. "It's a lovely dress," she said, her voice steady. "How much is it?" The first assistant looked surprised that she'd asked. "It's $12,000, she said, drawing out the word slightly. Clara nodded. "I see, it's beautiful." The assistant tilted her head again. "Yes, it's from our limited designer line. Most of our clients pre-order it months in advance. Her tone carried that subtle edge again, as if Clara didn't belong among those clients. Clara smiled faintly. "Thank you," she said. "I'll think about it." She stepped back into the fitting room to change, her hands trembling slightly as she hung the dress carefully. Inside, she felt a mix of emotions, sadness, embarrassment, even a bit of anger. She hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't lied. She hadn't touched anything carelessly. She'd only wanted to try on a dress. When she came out, she held the dress neatly folded over her arm. "Thank you for letting me try it," she said quietly as she handed it back. The assistant barely looked at her. "Of course," she said, her tone cool. "If you decide to buy, we can order it for you." Clara nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Sure, I'll keep that in mind." As she turned to leave, she heard one of the assistants whisper behind her again. "I told you," the woman said under her breath. She was just looking. Clara's heart sank. She could have said something. She could have turned around and told them they were being rude, but instead she kept walking. She pushed open the glass door and stepped back into the sunlight. Outside, she paused on the sidewalk, breathing in the warm air. The city noise felt louder now. Car horns, footsteps, laughter, but she couldn't shake the heaviness in her chest. She'd been judged before, but it never stopped stinging. It didn't matter that she was successful in her own right, or that she'd worked hard for everything she had. To those women, she was just another person who didn't look the part. She began walking again, slowly, her tote bag swinging at her side. As she moved through the crowd, she noticed her reflection in a store window. Her hair had loosened from the knot, a few strands falling around her face. Her sweater hung slightly off one shoulder, and there was still that faint smudge of paint on her wrist. She smiled a little. That was her, messy, creative, unpolished. And maybe that was okay. Still, a small part of her wished she hadn't gone into that boutique at all. The embarrassment lingered, replaying in her mind. The looks, the tone, the whisper. She felt invisible and exposed at the same time. She reached into her bag to find her sunglasses, hoping to hide the emotion in her eyes. A few steps away, someone else had been watching quietly. A man standing near a parked motorcycle had noticed the entire scene through the boutique window. He'd seen the way the assistants ignored her, how her smile had faded. Now, as Clara walked past, he caught a glimpse of her face, tired but kind, hurt but dignified. He didn't say anything yet. He just watched as she crossed the street toward the cafe, her shoulders slightly hunched, her steps slower than before. There was something about her that drew him in. Not her clothes, not her appearance, but the quiet strength in the way she carried herself. Clara found a seat at the cafe terrace and ordered a small cappuccino. As she waited, she pulled out her sketchbook, hoping to distract herself. Her fingers moved automatically, sketching the curve of the boutique window, the mannequins, the reflections on the glass. She drew the two women inside too, their perfect smiles and matching heels, then drew a small line between them, separating them from herself in the sketch. When the coffee arrived, she looked at the drawing and let out a quiet laugh. Maybe one day she thought she'd turn it into a painting, something honest, something that showed how people could be both beautiful and unkind at the same time. She took a sip of her drink and looked up at the street again. The sunlight was beginning to soften, and the sky was turning a warm shade of gold. People hurried past, lost in their own worlds, and for a moment, Clara felt a calm sense of belonging. The city could be harsh, but it was also full of stories. Stories like hers, stories of being seen and unseen. Across the street, the man by the motorcycle was still there. He had dark hair touched with silver, and a calm expression that seemed to carry both kindness and wisdom. He recognized her now. He'd seen her before, at events and photographs, always standing quietly beside him. But today, in her simplicity, she looked even more real, more human. He started walking toward her, not sure yet what he would say, but knowing he couldn't just let her sit there feeling small. She hadn't noticed him yet. She was still lost in her thoughts, sketching softly as the world moved around her. The sound of a distant bell rang as the cafe door opened, and for the first time that afternoon, Clara felt like maybe the day wasn't over yet. Maybe something good was still waiting to happen. As Clara sat at the cafe, her sketchbook resting on the table in front of her, she began to lose herself in the quiet rhythm of the city. She loved the energy of it all, the way people moved in and out of places, how the streets always seemed to have something new to offer. Yet today there was a lingering weight on her shoulders. It wasn't the kind of weight that was obvious, but the kind that followed you around without you realizing it. The way she had been treated at the boutique kept replaying in her mind, like an annoying song that wouldn't leave her head. But it wasn't just the dismissive attitude from the assistants that bothered her. It was the way she felt afterward, like she had somehow failed, or that there was something about her that didn't fit. As she sipped her cappuccino, trying to focus on the gentle swirl of foam in her cup, she noticed a figure in her peripheral vision. A man stood near the edge of the terrace, watching her with quiet intensity. He was tall, dressed casually, but in a way that suggested he knew what it meant to wear clothes that were both comfortable and timeless. His hair was dark and slightly tousled, as if it hadn't been combed in a while, but in a way that made it look deliberate. For a moment their eyes met, and she immediately felt the awkwardness of being stared at. But instead of looking away like most people would, he smiled softly, almost reassuringly. Clara froze for a moment. She didn't know why, but something about his presence made her feel both seen and not seen, all at once. It wasn't like the stares she had received from people earlier in the boutique, judgmental, calculating, cold. This was different. This was quiet and calm, without expectation. He walked over slowly, taking a seat at the empty chair across from her without asking. Clara blinked, unsure what to say or how to react. She had no idea who he was, but there was something familiar about him, like she had seen him in a dream. It wasn't his looks. There was just something about the way he carried himself. He didn't rush. He didn't try too hard to make her feel comfortable, but he didn't make her feel uncomfortable either. It was like he was simply present. Mind if I join you? He asked gently, his voice low and soft. Clara hesitated. Most people wouldn't have sat down at a stranger's table without asking, but there was something about him that made her feel like it was okay, even if she wasn't sure why. She shrugged, setting her coffee cup down. Sure, she said, her voice a little unsure. She didn't know why, but there was a certain calmness in his presence that made her feel less defensive. Maybe it was just the fact that he wasn't trying to sell her anything, like so many other people in the city. I was watching you for a moment, he said, his eyes kind and curious, but not in a way that made her feel exposed. You looked like you could use some company. Clara felt a strange warmth in her chest. She wasn't used to people being so straightforward with her, especially not in a city like this. People usually kept to themselves, focused on their own business, and didn't make eye contact unless they had to. He was different. She smiled, a little surprised by his honesty. I guess you could say that. It's been a strange day. He nodded knowingly, as if he understood. I saw you earlier, he said, leaning back in his chair a little. At the boutique. Clara stiffened. Her mind immediately jumped back to the moments before she had left the store, when the assistants had looked at her with such disdain. She thought of the way they had whispered behind her back. But instead of feeling defensive, she simply sighed and nodded. Yeah, she said quietly. I guess I didn't quite fit the image they were going for. The man gave her a thoughtful look, like he was trying to read something deeper in her words. What do you mean by that? He asked gently. Clara was surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. She wasn't sure if it was his calm demeanor or the fact that he wasn't rushing her, but she found herself opening up without thinking. I went in there just to look around. But as soon as I stepped in, I could feel the judgment, the way they looked at me like I didn't belong there. She paused, biting her lip, like they could tell I wasn't a real customer or something. The man nodded slowly, his expression one of understanding. It's a familiar feeling, he said. I think we've all felt it at some point, being judged by how we look, how we dress, or even the way we carry ourselves. He paused for a moment. But I don't think it's about you. It's about them. Clara raised an eyebrow, curious. What do you mean? He said, leaning forward slightly. People who make judgments like that, they're usually not seeing the full picture. They're looking at you based on their own assumptions. They see a person who doesn't match their expectations, and so they immediately put you into a box. But it's not about you. It's about how they see the world. Clara felt a small sense of relief as his words sunk in. It wasn't her fault. She hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't tried to fit into anyone's mold. She had simply wanted to try on a dress. She smiled a little, the tension in her shoulders loosening. Yeah, I guess you're right, she said softly, but it still stings. It's hard not to take it personally. The man gave her a small, reassuring smile. I get it. It's tough not to take things personally when they hit you where it hurts, but you know it's a sign of strength to not let their judgments define you. Clara looked at him puzzled. Strength? He nodded. Yeah, it's easy to feel small when people treat you like that, but it takes real strength to stand tall, even when the world tells you to shrink. And from what I can tell, you've got that strength. Clara was quiet for a moment. She hadn't expected to hear something like that today. She wasn't used to people seeing her in a way that made her feel good about herself, not in a city that seemed to value appearances more than anything else. But here was this man talking to her like he actually understood. I don't know about that, she said, shrugging slightly. I just want to be seen for who I am, you know? He nodded again, his expression thoughtful. I think we all do. But the trick is to stop waiting for others to see you. You have to see yourself first. And once you do, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. Clara smiled at that, the corners of her lips curving up slightly. It was simple advice, but for some reason it felt profound. Maybe it was because she had spent so much of her life trying to fit into the mold of what other people expected. Maybe it was time to stop doing that, thanks, she said, her voice softer now, more genuine. I needed to hear that, the man smiled back. Anytime. I'm just glad I could offer a little perspective. There was a brief moment of silence between them, the kind that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Clara glanced down at her sketchbook and then back up at the man. She still didn't know who he was, but for some reason that didn't matter. What mattered was the conversation they were having, the way he had made her feel heard and understood. Do you come here often? She asked, trying to break the silence. He chuckled softly. I do. It's one of the few places in the city where you can sit and not be rushed, but I usually come in the mornings. I like the quiet before everything gets busy. Clara nodded, glancing around at the hustle and bustle of the street. I get that. It's nice to find a spot where you can just breathe for a moment. They sat in silence for a few more moments, both of them lost in their own thoughts, but somehow it felt comforting. Clara felt like the weight from earlier in the day had lifted a little. The judgment, the whispers, they didn't matter as much now. Not when she had a moment like this, a reminder that there were still kind people in the world. People who could see beyond the surface and offer a bit of understanding. Finally, the man stood up, adjusting the collar of his jacket. Well, I should probably get going, he said, giving Clara a small nod. But I'm glad we talked. I hope you find your peace with today. Clara smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over her. Thanks for stopping by. It really helped. He gave her a wink, something warm and reassuring in his eyes. Any time, he said again, and then he turned and walked away. Clara sat there for a while longer, sipping her cappuccino and letting the moment settle in. The city moved around her, but for the first time in hours she felt at ease. Maybe things wouldn't always go the way she. The following day, Clara woke up with a slight heaviness in her chest. It wasn't the kind of heaviness that made her want to stay in bed, but the kind that lingered, almost like an unanswered question hanging in the air. The previous day had been a whirlwind. The boutique, the unexpected encounter with the man at the cafe, and the way he'd made her feel like she wasn't alone in the world. Still, there was something unsettled inside her, like a nagging thought she couldn't shake. She stretched her arms above her head, taking a deep breath as the soft morning light filtered in through the window. Her studio was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of traffic outside. It was a peaceful space, a place where she could escape the noise of the city. But today it felt a little too quiet, almost too still. Clara made her way to the kitchen and started making a cup of coffee. As the smell of the freshly brewed drink filled the air, her thoughts returned to the boutique. She couldn't stop thinking about the dress, the one she hadn't been able to buy. Part of her had known that it was out of her reach, but another part of her had wanted to try, just to see if she could, just to feel like she was part of something bigger than herself. But then she remembered the way the staff had treated her. The looks, the whispers, the sense that she didn't belong. She had always tried to stay humble, to live a life that was true to herself. But sometimes the world had a way of reminding you that not everyone saw things the same way. After finishing her coffee, Clara decided to go for a walk. She needed some fresh air, something to clear her head. It wasn't long before she found herself back on the same street she had walked down the day before, passing the boutique again. The shop window was still gleaming, the clothes hanging perfectly in place as if nothing had ever happened. She glanced at the window, her eyes lingering on the blue dress she had admired. For a moment, she considered going in again. Maybe this time it would be different. Maybe today they wouldn't judge her the same way. But as she stood there, she realized how futile it all was. The judgment wasn't just about the clothes. It was about something deeper, something she couldn't change with a new outfit or a different appearance. The world, it seemed, had certain expectations, and she wasn't sure she could ever meet them. As Clara turned away from the store, she heard a voice behind her. "You came back." It was the same man from the cafe, the one who had talked to her the day before. He was standing by a parked car, his hands in his pockets, watching her with that same calm expression. Clara smiled a little, surprised to see him again. She hadn't expected to run into him, especially not here. "I didn't think I'd see you again," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't think I'd be here either," he replied with a shrug. "But I noticed you walking by, and I figured maybe you could use someone to talk to." Clara blinked, surprised by the offer. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just thinking." He raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "Thinking about what?" She hesitated, looking down at the sidewalk for a moment before meeting his gaze. "About a lot of things," she said quietly. "Yesterday, I felt kind of stupid. I don't know. Maybe it's just the way the world works. I guess I don't really fit in with all of this." She gestured vaguely toward the street, the boutiques, the expensive cars, the polished surfaces of the city. It was a world that had always seemed out of reach for someone like her. She had never been good at fitting in with people who only cared about appearances, who judged you before they even knew your name. The man looked at her for a long moment before stepping closer, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said gently, "I don't think fitting in is really what it's about. It's more about finding a place where you feel comfortable, where you can just be yourself." Clara felt a strange warmth at his words. She wasn't sure why, but it felt like something she needed to hear. "I don't know where that place is," she admitted. "I mean, I've always tried to be myself, but it feels like it's never enough." He smiled, a small, knowing smile. "It's not about being enough for anyone else. It's about being enough for yourself." Clara was silent for a moment, the words sinking in. It wasn't something she had ever considered before. She had spent so much of her life trying to please others, trying to meet expectations, that she had never stopped to think about what she truly wanted. She had always been so concerned about fitting in, about proving herself to people who would never understand her, that she had forgotten to check in with herself. "I don't know if I can change the way I feel about all of this," she said, a hint of frustration in her voice. "The world feels like it's always telling me that I'm not enough. Like I have to constantly prove that I'm worthy of being here, worthy of the space I take up." The man nodded, his gaze kind and understanding. "I get it. We all feel like that sometimes. But the thing is, you don't have to prove anything. The world doesn't owe you validation. You don't have to fit into anyone else's idea of what you should be." Clara took a deep breath, the weight in her chest lightening slightly. His words made sense, but even as she understood them, she wasn't sure how to let go of the need for approval. How do you stop caring about what others think when it feels like everything around you is constantly judging? "I don't know how to stop," she said quietly. He smiled again, a warm, reassuring smile. "Maybe it's not about stopping. Maybe it's about changing the way you see things, about realizing that your worth isn't tied to anyone else's opinion." Clara wasn't sure what to say to that. It was a lot to take in, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to embrace it all just yet. But there was something comforting about his presence, something that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could start believing that her worth wasn't defined by anyone else. "I'm not sure if I'm there yet," she said, almost apologetically. He nodded as if he understood. "That's okay. It's a process. But you'll get there one step at a time." Clara smiled faintly. "Thanks," she said. "I appreciate you saying that. I guess I just needed to hear it." "You're welcome," he said, his voice warm. "And hey, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm around. I'm not going anywhere." Clara felt a small sense of relief at his words. For the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe things could get better. Maybe she didn't have to have everything figured out right now. Maybe, just maybe, she could take her time. As he walked away, Clara stood there for a moment, watching him disappear down the street. She wasn't sure where all of this was leading, but she felt something shift inside her. The world hadn't changed, but maybe the way she saw it had. Maybe the way she saw herself was starting to change too. She turned away from the boutique, deciding to continue her walk. The city felt different now, less intimidating, less overwhelming. It wasn't that she had figured it all out, far from it. But for the first time in a while, she felt like she was on the right path, even if it was just a small step. As she walked, the thoughts from earlier in the day began to fade. The worries, the doubts, the insecurities, they didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was that she was still here, still moving forward, still trying. And that, Clara realized, was enough. The next few days passed quietly for Clara, each one blending into the next like the soft hum of the city. She found herself thinking more and more about the conversation with the man she'd met at the cafe. His words, simple yet profound, had a way of sticking with her. You don't have to prove anything. Your worth isn't tied to anyone else's opinion. Every time she felt her mind drifting back to those self-doubts, she tried to remember what he had said. Slowly, something was shifting inside her, even though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. One morning, Clara woke up earlier than usual. The sun was just starting to peek through the curtains, and for some reason she felt energized. There was something in the air. Maybe it was the new day, or perhaps the quiet sense of change she had been feeling for the past few days. She decided to take advantage of the peaceful morning and step outside for a walk. The streets were still calm, almost empty, save for a few joggers and delivery trucks making their rounds. Clara strolled through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, her thoughts wandering as she passed the little cafes and shops that had always been a part of her routine. It wasn't that she hated her life, but for the first time, she felt like she was seeing it in a new light. The same old streets no longer seemed so dull. There was a new sense of possibility in the air, like she could actually change something about her life, if she was brave enough. Clara ended up near the park, a small quiet place with old trees and benches that were often empty during the early hours of the day. It was a spot she often visited when she needed to clear her mind. She found a bench under a large oak tree and sat down, enjoying the peace around her. For a few moments, all she could hear was the distant hum of the city, the occasional bird call and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was soothing, grounding, and for the first time in weeks, Clara felt like she could breathe. As she sat there, a familiar face appeared in the distance. The man from the cafe. He was walking toward the park, hands in his pockets, his gaze focused ahead but soft, as though he had all the time in the world. Clara stood up as he approached, surprised but not entirely unpleased to see him again. "Hey," she greeted him with a smile. He returned the smile, a little sheepishly. "Well, this is a coincidence," he said, his voice light. "I didn't expect to run into you again so soon." "I could say the same," Clara replied. "I come here often, but I didn't think you'd be walking this way." He chuckled softly, the sound warm. "I like to start my mornings with a walk. Clears my head." Clara nodded. "Yeah, me too. It's peaceful here." There was a pause as the two of them stood by the bench. Clara was unsure whether to invite him to sit or just let the moment pass, but before she could say anything, he spoke again. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, glancing toward the bench. Clara hesitated for just a moment. She had spent so much of her life alone, content in her own company, but for some reason she didn't mind his presence today. Maybe it was the comfort of the park, or maybe it was because she felt a strange sense of peace when he was around. Whatever it was, she smiled and nodded. "Sure, I don't mind." They both sat down on the bench, a comfortable silence hanging in the air. The park was waking up now. More people were arriving, some jogging, some walking dogs, and a few with their children. The soft morning light seemed to make everything feel brighter, like the world was just beginning to come alive again. "So, what brings you here today?" the man asked, breaking the silence. Clara shrugged lightly, looking out across the park. "I don't know. I've been feeling a little off lately. Thought a walk might help." "I get that," he said thoughtfully. "Sometimes the best way to sort things out is just to sit with your thoughts for a while. Not try to push them away or figure everything out all at once. Just let them be." Clara looked at him surprised. It wasn't exactly the advice she'd expected. It sounds simple, but sometimes it feels harder than it should be. "It's not always easy," he agreed, his voice calm. "But sometimes you don't have to have all the answers right away. Sometimes just letting yourself exist in the moment can help you get a little closer to the truth." Clara thought about that for a moment. It sounded simple enough, but she had always been the type of person who wanted to fix everything, even when there was nothing to fix. She was used to feeling like she had to always be striving for something better. But what if it wasn't about that? What if it was about accepting where she was right now without judgment? "I think I've been trying too hard to figure everything out," she said after a while. I've been pushing myself, trying to be something I'm not. And maybe that's why everything feels so heavy." The man nodded slowly, looking out at the park with a contemplative expression. "I think we all feel like that sometimes. The pressure to be something we're not. But maybe the secret is realizing that we don't have to be anything other than ourselves." Clara smiled faintly. "I've been hearing a lot about that lately. Being myself. It sounds nice, but I'm still not sure what that really means. Being yourself doesn't mean you have all the answers or that everything will suddenly fall into place," he said. "It just means you stop pretending to be someone else, even if you don't have it all figured out. You let yourself be human with all the messiness that comes with it." Clara nodded, her gaze drifting toward the ground. It felt like he was speaking to something inside her, something she had been trying to ignore for a long time. Maybe it wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about accepting the imperfections and still moving forward, one step at a time. "I guess I've spent so much time trying to fit into other people's ideas of what I should be," she said softly. "And when I don't meet those expectations, I feel like I've failed. But maybe it's not about meeting expectations. Maybe it's about creating my own path." The man smiled, his eyes warm. "Exactly. You don't have to follow anyone else's path. You can create your own." Clara sat back, feeling a weight lift from her chest. It was as though a piece of a puzzle she hadn't even known she was trying to solve had fallen into place. She didn't need to chase someone else's idea of success or happiness. She just needed to be true to herself, whatever that meant in the moment. After a few minutes of silence, Clara spoke again, more calmly this time. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, about not having to prove anything to anyone." The man turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "I meant it. You don't have to prove anything. You already are enough just the way you are." Clara felt a warmth spread inside her, the kind that came from hearing something true, something real. It wasn't a quick fix or an instant solution, but it was a step in the right direction. They sat in the park for a while longer, enjoying the quiet peace of the morning. People came and went, and the world continued its usual rhythm. But for Clara, it felt like a moment of clarity. She didn't have to have it all figured out today or tomorrow or ever. What mattered was that she was taking steps toward being her true self, even if those steps were small. Eventually, the man stood up, stretching his arms above his head. "Well, I should probably get going, but I'm glad we ran into each other again." Clara smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude she hadn't expected. "Yeah, me too. Thanks for the conversation." "Anytime," he said, offering her a kind smile before turning to leave. "Take care of yourself, Clara." As he walked away, Clara stayed on the bench for a moment longer, watching the world around her. She didn't know where all of this was leading, but she was starting to feel okay with that. Life didn't have to be a race, and it didn't have to be perfect. It was enough to just keep moving forward, one step at a time, in her own direction. The day felt brighter somehow as she stood up and stretched. She wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. As the weeks went by, Clara found herself growing in ways she hadn't expected. The more she thought about the conversation with the man in the park, the more she realized how much she had been holding herself back. It wasn't just the world that had been making her feel small. It was her own thoughts and expectations. The pressure to fit into a mold she never quite understood had been weighing on her for so long. And now, for the first time, she was beginning to see that she didn't have to play by anyone else's rules. She could create her own. Every day felt like a small victory. She started to make choices that felt more like her choices. Not choices based on what she thought others wanted or expected. She took different routes when walking through the city, explored new cafes, and wore clothes that made her feel comfortable rather than trying to look a certain way. It was like she was shedding a layer of herself bit by bit, and in its place was something more genuine. One afternoon, as Clara sat at her favorite cafe, a place she had come to love for its quiet charm, she glanced out the window and saw a familiar face. It was him again, the man from the park. This time he wasn't alone. He was sitting at a table across from a woman, laughing and chatting easily. Clara watched them for a moment, feeling an odd mix of curiosity and hesitation. She wasn't sure why, but something about seeing him with someone else made her feel a little unsettled. But then she remembered. It doesn't matter. She didn't need to be attached to him or his life in any way. He was just a person who had happened to cross her path at the right moment. His presence had sparked something in her, but that was where it ended. She had her own journey to focus on. Shaking the feeling off, Clara turned her attention back to her coffee and her book. As she sipped the warm drink, she couldn't help but reflect on how much things had changed for her in the last few weeks. The insecurities that had once dominated her thoughts were still there, but they weren't as loud. They didn't hold the same power over her anymore. A soft ding from her phone interrupted her thoughts, and she glanced down at the screen. It was a message from her friend, asking if she wanted to meet up for dinner later that evening. Clara smiled. It had been a while since she'd spent time with anyone other than herself, and the idea of catching up sounded good. She quickly typed out a response, agreeing to meet at one of the restaurants downtown. When she arrived at the restaurant that evening, she found her friend already waiting at the table, looking as lively as ever. Clara took a seat and the two of them began chatting easily. The conversation flowed without any effort, the way it always had. They talked about work, relationships, the usual things. But something felt different this time. Clara found herself speaking more freely without hesitation, sharing thoughts that she might have kept to herself in the past. She realized that the more she opened up, the lighter she felt, like a weight was lifting off her shoulders. After dinner, they decided to take a walk around the city. The streets were quieter now, the evening air cool but refreshing. As they walked, her friend asked how Clara had been doing, and Clara paused before answering. "I've been good, actually," Clara said, smiling. "Really good?" Her friend raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "I thought you were having a tough time a few weeks ago." "You seemed kind of off," Clara nodded. "I was, but I've been thinking a lot about things. About life, you know? And I think I'm finally starting to understand what it means to just be. I don't have to have everything figured out, and I don't have to follow anyone else's idea of success. I'm just trying to figure out what works for me." Her friend smiled warmly, clearly proud of her. "That sounds like a huge step. I'm glad to hear it." "I don't know if I'm all the way there yet," Clara admitted, "but I'm trying to be more honest with myself." "It's a process, of course," her friend said, her voice soft. "But you're doing great. It's all about progress, not perfection." Clara smiled at the simplicity of the statement. It felt good to hear those words, especially from someone who had always known her. She wasn't perfect, and she didn't have to be. That thought, that small shift in perspective, was enough to help her embrace the journey, however long it took. As they continued walking, Clara felt a sense of contentment settle in. The city, the people around her, everything felt like it was in its right place. Even though there were still challenges ahead, she no longer felt overwhelmed by them. Life wasn't about avoiding struggles. It was about learning to move through them, to grow despite them. The next few days were filled with small but meaningful moments. Clara took a day off work and spent it exploring the city. She visited a museum she'd always wanted to go to, spent time at a park reading, and even sat by the water, watching the boats go by. She didn't need anyone else to tell her how to spend her time anymore. She was learning to be present, to enjoy things for what they were rather than constantly searching for meaning or validation. It was during one of these moments, as Clara sat on a bench near the water, that she heard a familiar voice. She turned around and saw the man from the cafe, the one who had started this whole shift in her life. This time there was no sense of hesitation or confusion. She simply smiled and greeted him as if they were old friends. "Hey," she said, standing up. He smiled back, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "Well, this is a surprise. Fancy running into you here," Clara laughed. "I guess we're both drawn to the same places." He nodded, walking over to sit on the bench beside her. There was no tension, no awkwardness, just an easy sense of familiarity. "I've been thinking about you," he said after a moment, looking out at the water. "About what you said the last time we talked. About being yourself." Clara looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "Really?" "Yeah," he said. "It made me realize that I've been doing the same thing you've been doing. Trying to meet everyone else's expectations, thinking that if I just kept going in the same direction, I'd eventually find what I was looking for. But I don't think it works that way anymore. I think the answer is to stop trying to force things." Clara nodded, feeling a sense of connection with him. "I get it. I've been learning that too. It's not about trying to be what others want. It's about figuring out what makes you happy, what makes you feel good inside." The man smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Exactly. And I think I'm starting to get there. It's not easy, but it's worth it. They sat in silence for a few moments, both of them looking out at the water. There was no need for words. They understood each other in a way that didn't require explaining. It felt like the world around them had slowed down, giving them a moment of peace. Eventually, Clara spoke again. "I'm really glad we met." He turned to her, a soft smile on his face. "Me too." For a long time, they just sat there talking about life, about the small things that made each day worth living. It was the kind of conversation that made Clara feel seen, like her thoughts and feelings mattered. In a world that often felt too loud, too fast, this moment was a reminder that sometimes it was enough to simply be present. As the evening came to an end, they stood up to leave. Clara felt a quiet sense of contentment, the kind that came from knowing she was on the right path. Even if it wasn't always clear where it would lead. "I guess I'll see you around," he said with a smile. Clara nodded. "Yeah, I think so." And as she walked away, she realized that she didn't need to have all the answers. Life was a journey, and she was finally learning to enjoy the ride.